The night air felt cool against Judge Elaine Cartwright's face as she drove with her window cracked open just a bit. The clock on her dashboard showed 10:45 p.m. Streets in her neighborhood were quiet, most houses already dark with just a few porch lights glowing. After 14 hours at the courthouse, all she wanted was to kick off her shoes and sink into her couch with a cup of tea. Her mind kept replaying moments from today's case, a complex dispute about water rights that affected thousands of people. As a federal judge for nearly 15 years, she'd handled countless difficult cases, but this one had special importance for several farming communities. Judge Cartwright adjusted the volume on her classical music station and took a deep breath. The day had been long but rewarding. She'd worked her way up from humble beginnings, putting herself through law school while working 2 jobs, then becoming a respected civil rights attorney before her appointment to the federal bench. Tonight, like most nights, she drove home alone, her thoughts good company after years of independence. The sudden flash of police lights in her rearview mirror startled her. Judge Cartwright checked her speedometer. She was driving exactly at the speed limit. She hadn't run any lights, made any illegal turns, or broken any traffic rules. With practiced movements, she signaled and pulled to the side of the road, putting her car in park. Years of experience, both personal and from cases she'd presided over, had taught her what to do. She turned off her music, rolled down her window, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen, and waited. In her rearview mirror, she could see 2 officers emerging from their patrol car, talking to each other before approaching. "I don't care what kind of car she's driving," she overheard one officer say to the other. "These people always have something to hide." Judge Cartwright felt her stomach tighten at the comment, but kept her face neutral. She'd faced this before. The first officer, whose nameplate read Kellerman, approached her window while his partner stood back, hand resting near his weapon. "License and registration," Officer Kellerman demanded sharply, not bothering with any greeting or explanation for the stop. His flashlight beam moved around her car interior before settling uncomfortably on her face. "Good evening, officer," Judge Cartwright replied calmly. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" The officer's expression hardened. "You were driving erratically. License and registration now." She knew she had been driving perfectly, but decided to get identification first, then address the false claim. "I'll get my license from my purse on the passenger seat and my registration from the glove compartment. I'm moving slowly so you can see what I'm doing." The officer didn't acknowledge her careful explanation, just watched with narrowed eyes as she reached for her purse. She handed over her driver's license. "My registration is in my glove compartment," she explained again before reaching over. "Just hurry up," the second officer, Ramirez, called from where he stood. "We don't have all night." Judge Cartwright carefully opened her glove compartment and retrieved her registration, handing it over along with her license. She decided to identify herself professionally. "Officers, I should let you know that I'm a federal judge. I've just left the courthouse and was heading home. I don't believe I was driving erratically or breaking any traffic laws." Both officers exchanged glances, and Officer Kellerman let out a short laugh. "Right. And I'm the president. Let me guess, you have a badge in there too? Or maybe you know important people who'll get us fired?" "I'm simply identifying myself," she replied, maintaining her composure. "If there's some confusion about my driving, perhaps your dashcam footage would clarify things. I'd be happy to speak with a supervisor about this stop." Officer Ramirez stepped closer now. "Listen, lady, you don't make demands here. We decide who talks to supervisors." "I'm not making demands, just respectfully. Step out of the vehicle." Officer Kellerman cut her off. His hand moved to rest on his holster. Judge Cartwright felt her heart rate increase but kept her voice steady. "Officer, I don't understand why I need to exit my vehicle for a routine traffic stop. I've provided my identification and registration as requested. Out of the car, now." Each word came out like ice. "You're being uncooperative." Knowing that the situation was escalating dangerously, Judge Cartwright carefully said, "I'll comply with your instruction, but I want to note that I don't consent to any searches. I'm going to unfasten my seatbelt and open my door slowly." As she reached for her seatbelt, She also tried to reach for her judicial identification in her purse. Officer Ramirez suddenly shouted, "She's reaching for something, hands where we can see them." "I was just reaching for my judicial ID," she began explaining. Officer Kellerman yanked her door open. "Out! Now! Hands up!" Judge Cartwright stepped out carefully, hands raised. "Officers, please. There's been a misunderstanding. My judicial credentials are in my purse." "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Officer Kellerman ordered, grabbing her arm roughly. "This is unnecessary. I've done nothing wrong," she stated firmly, though she complied to avoid further escalation. "These people always think they're special," Officer Ramirez muttered loudly enough for her to hear. "Always making up stories about being important." Judge Cartwright felt cool metal as handcuffs were slapped onto her wrists, tightened unnecessarily. The officers then began searching her car without permission. "You have no legal grounds to search." "My vehicle," she said, trying to maintain her dignity while standing handcuffed by the roadside. "I do not consent to this search." Officer Kellerman ignored her, pulling items from her car. When he found her black judicial robe and leather folder, with her federal credentials, his searching slowed. Well, he said, flipping through her identification. "Looks like somebody went to a lot of trouble making fake federal IDs." He held up her robe. "Got the costume and everything." "Those are not fake," Judge Cartwright said. "As I've been trying to tell you, I am a federal judge. You can call the courthouse to verify my identity." The officers exchanged looks. "Let's add impersonating a federal official to the charges," Officer Ramirez suggested with a smirk. Despite the humiliation of standing handcuffed on the street she'd driven down countless times, Judge Cartwright remained outwardly calm. Her mind, however, was documenting every word, every action. She noticed the body cams on both officers, knowing they were recording everything. "I would like to speak to your supervising officer immediately," she stated clearly for the cameras. "You'll speak to whoever we say at the station," Officer Kellerman replied, guiding her toward their patrol car. As they placed her in the back seat, Judge Cartwright noticed a neighbor watching from their driveway, phone raised as if recording. She knew what these officers didn't, that every moment of this unlawful detention was being documented, and soon they would learn exactly who they had wrongfully arrested. The back seat of the police car smelled like cleaning products and something else Judge Cartwright couldn't quite place. She sat straight-backed, despite the handcuffs digging into her wrists. Through the partition, she could hear Officers Kellerman and Ramirez talking as if she wasn't there. "Can you believe she actually had a judge costume in her car?" Officer Ramirez laughed. "That's a new one." "People will say anything to get out of a ticket," Officer Kellerman replied, starting the engine. "But this one went all out with the props." Judge Cartwright closed her eyes briefly, focusing on her breathing. 15 years on the federal bench, and here she was, handcuffed in the back of a police car like a criminal. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just this morning, she'd been presiding over a case involving police misconduct in another district. When she opened her eyes, she noticed the patrol car's camera pointed at her. Good, she thought. More evidence. "Officers," she said clearly, knowing her words would be recorded. "I want to state again that I am a federal judge. My name is Elaine Cartwright. I preside in the Eastern District Courthouse. You can verify my identity with a simple phone call. This detention is unlawful." Officer Kellerman turned up the radio, drowning out her words. In the rearview mirror, she caught his smirk. The drive to the precinct took about 15 minutes. Judge Cartwright used the time to mentally catalog every procedural violation they'd committed. Pulling her over without cause. Searching her car, without consent or probable cause. Ignoring her identification. Excessive force and restraint. Failure to read Miranda rights. The list grew longer with each passing minute. When they arrived at the police station, the officers made her wait in the car while they chatted with colleagues outside. Through the window, she could see them laughing, glancing back at her occasionally. She felt like an exhibit. Finally, Officer Ramirez opened the door. "Out you go, Your Honor," he said, making air quotes with his fingers. The precinct was busy for this time of night. Officers moved about. People sat in plastic chairs waiting. Phones rang constantly. Judge Cartwright held her head high as she was led through the main area, aware of eyes turning to look at her. She'd seen countless defendants walk this same path in her courtroom. Now she was experiencing it firsthand. "Got a live one here," Officer Kellerman announced to the booking desk. Driving erratically, resisting compliance, and impersonating a federal official, the desk sergeant, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, looked up from his computer. His nameplate read Wilson. He glanced at Judge Cartwright, then back at his screen. "Name?" he asked, fingers hovering over his keyboard. "Elaine Cartwright," she replied clearly. Something flickered across Sergeant Wilson's face. He looked up again, more carefully this time. "Judge Cartwright?" he asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. Officer Kellerman's smile faltered. "She claims to be some judge, yeah. Got a whole costume and fake ID in her car." Sergeant Wilson stood up slowly. "Officers, that's Federal Judge Elaine Cartwright. She presided over my nephew's adoption last year." He turned to Judge Cartwright. "Your Honor, what's going on here?" The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Officers nearby stopped what they were doing, conversations hushed. "These officers pulled me over without cause, searched my vehicle without consent, and arrested me despite my identification," Judge Cartwright stated calmly. "I would appreciate if someone would remove these handcuffs and contact the watch commander immediately." Sergeant Wilson came around the desk quickly. "Of course, Your Honor, right away." He shot a look at the two officers that could have melted steel. "Keys," he demanded, holding out his hand to Officer Kellerman, who stood frozen in place. Officer Ramirez found his voice first. "There must be some mistake. She didn't—" "Keys, now." Sergeant Wilson's tone left no room for argument. With reluctant movements, Officer Kellerman produced the handcuff keys and handed them over. Sergeant Wilson carefully removed the cuffs from Judge Cartwright's wrists, wincing when he saw the red marks they'd left. "I am so sorry, Your Honor. I'll get the watch, Commander, right away." He turned to another officer nearby. "Get the commander down here now." The two arresting officers exchanged panicked glances. Their confident swagger had vanished, replaced by the dawning realization of what they'd done. "We were just following protocol," Officer Ramirez began weakly. "She was uncooperative during the traffic stop." "Save it," Sergeant Wilson snapped. He guided Judge Cartwright to a private office nearby. "Please wait in here, Your Honor. Can I get you some water or coffee?" "Water would be fine, thank you," she replied, rubbing her wrists. Within minutes, the station was buzzing with activity. The watch commander, Captain Reynolds, arrived looking like he'd been awakened from sleep, his uniform hastily put on. He entered the office with Sergeant Wilson. "Judge Cartwright, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for this incident," Captain Reynolds said, taking a seat across from her. "Rest assured, we will get to the bottom of this immediately." Judge Cartwright took a sip of water. "Captain, I want all body camera footage, dash camera footage, and dispatch records preserved. I also want the names and badge numbers of both officers and access to their disciplinary records." Captain Reynolds nodded quickly. "Of course, Your Honor, anything you need." Outside the office, through the glass windows, Judge Cartwright could see Officers Kellerman and Ramirez being spoken to by another superior officer. Their faces had lost all color. "I'd like my personal belongings returned, and I'll need a ride. Back to my vehicle," she continued calmly. "I'll drive you personally," Captain Reynolds offered. Judge Cartwright shook her head. "That won't be necessary, but I would like to speak with your Internal Affairs Department tomorrow morning." As arrangements were being made, she noticed Officer Kellerman trying to access a computer terminal, only to be stopped by Sergeant Wilson. She recognized the move. They were already trying to alter records. When her belongings were returned, Judge Cartwright checked that everything was there: her judicial ID, her robe, her purse. She didn't smile or show anger. She remained professionally composed, which seemed to unnerve the officers more than if she had yelled. A female officer was assigned to drive her back to her car. As they walked through the station, conversations stopped. Eyes followed her. The story was already spreading through the precinct like wildfire. "Your Honor," the female officer said quietly as they reached the patrol car. I want you to know that not all of us are like those two. Judge Cartwright nodded. I know that, officer. I've worked with many excellent police officers throughout my career. The drive back to her vehicle was silent. When they arrived, Judge Cartwright thanked the officer and got into her own car. Only then, alone in the privacy of her vehicle, did she allow herself a moment to process what had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel, but as quickly as the moment of vulnerability came, it passed. Judge Cartwright started her car and drove home, her mind already planning her next steps. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about a system that needed fixing, and she was uniquely positioned to make that happen. As she pulled into her driveway, she checked her watch. Almost midnight. Tomorrow would be a busy day. The officers who had arrested her didn't know it yet, but their careers had just taken a dramatic turn. More importantly, their actions would soon bring about changes that would affect police departments across the entire region. Judge Cartwright woke before her alarm the next morning. She had slept fitfully, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind. The red marks on her wrists had darkened to bruises, visible reminders of what had happened. She traced them gently as she sat on the edge of her bed gathering her thoughts. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn. Colleagues, friends, even reporters somehow already knew about the incident. She ignored the calls for now. This wasn't going to be a media spectacle if she could help it. This was going to be handled the right way, through proper legal channels, after. A quick shower and a cup of strong coffee. Judge Cartwright dressed in one of her most formal suits, dark navy with subtle pinstripes. The outfit was like armor, projecting authority and competence. Today, she needed both. Her first call was to her old law school friend Thomas, now working at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They spoke for 30 minutes, her voice calm and measured as she recounted every detail from the night before. This isn't just about me, Tom, she explained, looking out her kitchen window at the morning light. Those officers have done this before, I'm certain of it, and they'll do it again if nothing changes. I'll start the paperwork today, Thomas promised. We'll need all the evidence you can get. Body cam footage, dash cam, witnesses, everything. I'm heading to the precinct now to make formal requests for all recordings, she replied. And I've already spoken with the FBI field office. They're sending someone to meet me there. After ending the call, Judge Cartwright sat at her kitchen table and made a list. She needed to be methodical, thorough. This case would need to be airtight. When she arrived at the police precinct, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Word had spread about who she was and what had happened. Officers averted their eyes as she walked through the main area, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. Captain Reynolds met her at the front desk, looking like he hadn't slept at all. Judge Cartwright, we've been expecting you. I've set up a conference room for your meeting with Internal Affairs. Thank you, Captain. I'll also need a written incident report and formal requests for all audio and video recordings from last night. The captain nodded quickly. Of course, I've already put holds on all that material. Agent Chen from the FBI was waiting in the conference room, a slim folder on the table in front of him. He stood when Judge Cartwright entered. Your Honor, he greeted her with a firm handshake. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I, Agent Chen. She took a seat across from him. I understand you've been briefed on what happened. Yes, and I've taken the liberty of pulling some background information. He opened the folder. Officers Kellerman and Ramirez have been partners for 3 years. In that time, there have been 17 formal complaints filed against them for excessive force and racial profiling. Judge Cartwright raised an eyebrow. 17? And yet they're still on patrol duty? Every complaint was dismissed due to insufficient evidence or conflicting accounts. Agent Chen explained, his expression neutral, but his tone revealing his thoughts on the matter. The door opened, and 2 officers from Internal Affairs entered, followed by a woman who introduced herself as the department's legal counsel. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. Judge Cartwright recounted her experience in precise detail, never raising her voice, never showing anger. Just facts, delivered with the same clarity she expected in her courtroom. I'll need copies of all 17 previous complaints against these officers, she concluded. And I want to review your department's training materials on racial profiling and proper stop procedures. The legal counsel shifted uncomfortably. Some of those materials might be considered internal. They'll be part of discovery in the federal civil rights lawsuit I'm preparing. Judge Cartwright interrupted smoothly. You can provide them voluntarily now or by court order later. Your choice. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood the weight of what she was saying. This wasn't going to be quietly settled or brushed aside. After the meeting, Judge Cartwright met with 3 other people who had filed complaints against the same officers. Their stories followed disturbing patterns: unnecessary stops, disrespectful treatment, searches without consent, and in 2 cases, physical force. None of their complaints had resulted in any disciplinary action. They said it was my word against the officers, explained one man, a college professor who'd been pulled over while driving home from evening classes. They told me the body cam footage didn't show anything wrong. Judge Cartwright made notes as they spoke. Did you ever get to see that footage? No, he replied. They said it wasn't public record. By late afternoon, Judge Cartwright was in her office at the courthouse reviewing the legal strategy with Thomas and 2 other civil rights attorneys. The evidence was mounting quickly. The department had reluctantly provided the body cam footage from the night before, clearly showing the officer's misconduct. A neighbor had also come forward with cell phone video of her arrest. We don't just go after the officers, Judge Cartwright explained, pointing to a whiteboard where they'd outlined their approach. We go after the system that protected them, the supervisors who dismissed complaints, the training officers who failed to correct bad behavior, the department policies that allowed this pattern to continue. One of the attorneys looked concerned. That's a much bigger fight, Your Honor. It's the fight that needs to happen, she replied firmly. Punishing 2 officers won't change anything if the culture stays the same. As the legal team worked into the evening, news vans gathered outside the courthouse. Judge Cartwright had declined all interview requests, but the story was spreading. By dinner time, the mayor had issued a statement promising a full and transparent investigation. Judge Cartwright smiled when she read it on her phone. Politicians always scrambled when they sensed trouble, but promises weren't enough. She wanted action, real change. That night, as she finally drove home, she passed the spot where she'd been pulled over. She slowed, remembering the feelings of that moment. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. Emotions she'd kept carefully controlled all day washed over her. She pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a long moment, thinking about all the people who'd experienced what she had but didn't have her resources or position. People who had no way to fight back when the system failed them. This isn't just about me, she whispered to herself, repeating what she'd told Thomas. That morning, her resolve strengthened. She would use every legal tool, every connection, every bit of knowledge from her years on the bench to make this case matter. As she walked to her front door, her phone rang. It was Agent Chen. Judge, we found something you need to see, he said, without preamble. Those officers have been turning off their body cams during certain stops, but the dashboard camera was still running. We've got footage of at least 5 other incidents that match the pattern of your stop. Judge Cartwright paused on her porch steps. Send everything you have to my office. First thing tomorrow, we're taking this to the next level. 3 weeks after the incident, Judge Cartwright sat in the back row of a packed community meeting. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, and no makeup, making her nearly unrecognizable to those who only knew her formal courtroom appearance. She wanted to hear what people said when they didn't know she was listening. The police chief stood at the front facing angry residents. The story had spread through the community like wildfire after local news got hold of the neighbor's cell phone video showing her arrest. We take these allegations very seriously, the chief was saying, his forehead shiny with sweat under the bright lights. Officers Kellerman and Ramirez have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Administrative leave? A woman stood up from the audience. You mean paid vacation while you figure out how to cover this up like all the other complaints? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Judge Cartwright made mental notes of every comment. every accusation. Each person who spoke described similar experiences: unnecessary stops, dismissive treatment, complaints that went nowhere. The meeting ran long, with the chief looking increasingly uncomfortable as more residents shared their stories. When it finally ended, Judge Cartwright slipped out quietly and drove to meet Agent Chen at a small coffee shop away from downtown. He was waiting at a corner table with a thick folder. "The FBI investigation is officially expanding," he told her, sliding the folder across the table. "We've identified 23 cases with similar patterns involving those two officers, but that's just the beginning. The deeper we dig, the more we find." Judge Cartwright flipped through the documents. "What about internal affairs? Any movement there?" Agent Chen shook his head. "Officially, they're cooperating. Unofficially, they're dragging their feet, claiming they need time for a thorough review." "Time to shred records, more likely," she replied, sipping her tea. "But they don't realize we already have copies of everything." The next morning, Judge Cartwright met with her legal team in a conference room at the courthouse. Large whiteboards covered the walls, mapping out connections between officers, supervisors, and complaints. "The department's lawyer called again," Thomas said as they reviewed documents. "They're offering a settlement, full admission of wrongdoing by the two officers, policy review, and a significant financial payment to you." Judge Cartwright didn't even look up from her papers. "Not interested." "It's a substantial offer," another attorney pointed out. "This isn't about money," she replied firmly. "If we settle now, those officers might be sacrificed, but the system stays intact. Nothing really changes." She stood up and walked to one of the whiteboards. "Look at this pattern. The same supervisors signed off on dismissing multiple complaints. The same training officers cleared these men for duty despite documented issues. This is institutional." Later that afternoon, Judge Cartwright received an unexpected visitor. Captain Reynolds had come to her chambers looking nervous. "Your Honor, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now," he began, turning his hat in his hands. "But there's something you should know." She gestured for him to sit. "Go on." "I've been with the department for 22 years, he said quietly. "What happened to you? It wasn't an isolated incident. Those officers have a reputation, but they're protected." "Protected by whom?" she asked, though she already had suspicions. "It goes all the way up. The chief, the commissioner. They don't want numbers that make the department look bad. High complaint rates affect funding, elections." He paused. "I've tried to address issues before, but I was told to stay in my lane." Judge Cartwright studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I have 3 years until retirement, and I can't look at myself in the mirror anymore." He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and placed it on her desk. Internal review files from the last 5 years. Complaints that never made it to official record. The evidence kept building. A week later, the police union held a press conference, defending the officers, claiming they had followed protocol and that Judge Cartwright had been uncooperative during a legitimate traffic stop. They played edited portions of the body cam footage that omitted the most damning parts. Judge Cartwright watched the broadcast from her office, a small smile playing on her lips. "They just made our case stronger," she told Thomas. "We have the complete unedited footage. They just committed perjury on live television." That evening, the unedited footage was leaked to every major news outlet. By morning, public outrage had reached new heights. City council members were calling for resignations. The mayor scheduled an emergency press conference. At the federal courthouse, Judge Cartwright recused herself from all cases involving the local police department and filed her formal lawsuit. The complaint named not just officers Kellerman and Ramirez, but 15 other defendants, including supervisors, the police chief, and the city itself. "This is unprecedented," one legal commentator said on the evening news. A federal judge, using her own experience to challenge an entire police department's culture. This could reshape law enforcement practices across the country. Behind the scenes, cracks in the department's unity began to show. Younger officers, unwilling to be painted with the same brush as the accused, started coming forward with their own accounts of problematic behavior they'd witnessed. Supervisors began pointing fingers at each other, trying to shift blame. Officer Ramirez's lawyer contacted Judge Cartwright's legal team, floating the possibility of his client testifying against others in exchange for leniency. Officer Kellerman remained defiant, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, even as more evidence mounted against him. The police chief held another press conference, announcing an overhaul of department policies and the creation of a civilian review board. Judge Cartwright recognized it for what it was, a desperate attempt to appear proactive while changing as little as possible. 6 weeks after her arrest, Judge Cartwright stood before a group of federal judges from across the country. She had been asked to speak about her experience and the case she was building. "What happened to me was humiliating," she told her colleagues, her voice steady. "But for many in our communities, this treatment is routine. The difference is, I have the knowledge, resources, and position to fight back. Most citizens don't." She outlined her approach to the case, emphasizing that individual punishment wasn't enough. "We need systemic change, new training protocols, real accountability measures, independent oversight with actual authority." After her presentation, dozens of her fellow judges offered support. Some shared similar experiences. Others offered legal assistance. By the end of the day, a task force had been formed. Federal judges committed to developing new standards for police accountability across jurisdictions. As Judge Cartwright drove home that evening, she passed a small protest outside the police headquarters. People held signs demanding justice and reform. She slowed her car, watching for a moment. Among the crowd were faces from the community meeting she'd attended, ordinary people finding their voices. The department's reckoning had begun, and there would be no going back to the way things were before. What those two officers didn't know when they pulled her over that night was that they had unintentionally sparked exactly the change that was long overdue. 1 year had passed since that night when Judge Cartwright was wrongfully pulled over and arrested. She stood at the window of her office, watching rain tap against the glass. On her desk lay the final report from the Department of Justice, over 300 pages detailing a pattern of discriminatory practices within the police department. The investigation had grown far beyond her initial case, uncovering decades of problems. Evidence that might have remained buried if two officers hadn't made the mistake of arresting someone with the knowledge and resources to fight back. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas entered, looking tired but satisfied. "It's official," he said, holding up a document. "The consent decree has been signed. The department has agreed to all 27 reform requirements." Judge Cartwright nodded, taking the document from him. "And the officers?" "Kellerman was indicted on federal civil rights violations and evidence tampering. The trial starts next month." Thomas sat in the chair across from her desk. "Ramirez took a plea deal. He's testifying against everyone, including the chief and 3 supervisors." She scanned the consent decree, noting the requirements: mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off during encounters, independent review of all use of force incidents, new training protocols, community oversight board with real power, regular audits by outside agencies. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "Implementation will be the real challenge." Outside her office, the corridors of the federal building buzzed with activity. The case had drawn national attention, inspiring similar investigations in other cities. What had happened to her had become a catalyst for change that reached far beyond one traffic stop, or even one police department. That afternoon, Judge Cartwright drove to the community center where it had all started, the place where she'd sat in the back row listening to angry residents a year earlier. Today, she was the main speaker at a town hall meeting to explain the consent decree to the public. The room was packed, with people standing along the walls. She recognized many faces, people who had shared their stories, who had filed complaints that went nowhere, who had lived with fear and distrust of those meant to protect them. "This document isn't just paper," she told the crowd, holding up the consent decree. "It's a promise. A promise that what happened to me, what happened to many of you, will not be brushed aside anymore." She explained each major point in plain language, avoiding legal jargon. As she spoke, she could see hope beginning to replace skepticism on many faces. But this only works if we all stay involved, she continued. The reforms we've fought for need community oversight. They need you to keep watching, keep reporting, keep holding everyone accountable, including me and other officials. After the meeting, a young woman approached her. My brother was pulled over by those same officers 3 years ago, she said quietly. They planted evidence in his car. He's still in prison. Judge Cartwright took the woman's contact information. We're reviewing every case those officers were involved in, every arrest, every search, every testimony they gave in court. By evening, she was back in her office with her legal team, reviewing case files of people possibly wrongfully convicted based on the officers' testimony. The work was overwhelming, but necessary. Real justice meant not just changing the future, but addressing past wrongs. 2 days later, Judge Cartwright testified before state legislators who were considering a bill inspired by her case. The Police Accountability Act would require similar reforms for all departments across the state. The problem isn't limited to one department or a few bad officers, she told them. It's about systems that protect misconduct rather than preventing it. It's about cultures that value loyalty over integrity. The gallery was filled with police officers, some supportive, others hostile to the proposed changes. Judge Cartwright addressed them directly. The majority of you serve with honor every day. These reforms don't threaten good policing. They protect it. They make it harder for the few who abuse their power to hide behind a badge, and easier for the many good officers to do their jobs with community trust and support. The next week brought the settlement of her civil lawsuit. The financial award was substantial, but Judge Cartwright had already decided what to do with it. At a press conference on the courthouse steps, she announced the creation of 2 new initiatives. Today I'm establishing the Justice Access Legal Clinic, she told the assembled reporters and community members. This clinic will provide free legal representation to anyone who believes their civil rights have been violated by law enforcement. She paused, looking out at the crowd. And with the remaining funds, I'm creating a scholarship program for students from our community who want to pursue careers in law, public policy, or law enforcement, because long-term change requires new voices at every level of the system. A month later, Officer Kellerman's trial began. Judge Cartwright attended as an observer, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom each day. She listened as witness after witness described similar experiences to her own. The evidence was overwhelming. When the guilty verdict was announced, she felt no personal satisfaction, only a sense that accountability was finally taking hold. The police department, under new leadership and the watchful eye of federal monitors, began implementing the required reforms. Not without resistance. Change never comes easily to institutions, but with steady progress that could be measured and verified. 6 months after the consent decree took effect, complaints against officers had dropped by 30%. Arrests of minority residents for minor infractions had decreased even more dramatically. Community satisfaction surveys showed growing trust. On the anniversary of the consent decree signing, Judge Cartwright met with the new police chief, a respected veteran officer who had been vocal about the need for reform long before her case began. We still have a long way to go, the new chief admitted during their meeting. But for the first time in my 20-year career, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. Later that evening, Judge Cartwright visited the spot where she'd been pulled over 2 years earlier. She parked her car and stood on the sidewalk, remembering the fear and humiliation she'd felt that night. A patrol car drove by slowly, the officer inside nodding respectfully when he recognized her. The simple gesture, professional, courteous, represented everything she'd been fighting for. As she drove home, Judge Cartwright reflected on how a moment of injustice had led to meaningful change. Not because she was special, but because she had refused to let that injustice pass unchallenged. The work wasn't finished. Real change never happened overnight, but systems that had remained broken for generations were finally beginning to transform. And in courtrooms, community centers, and police academies across the country, her case was being studied as a turning point, proof that even the most entrenched problems could be addressed when enough people demanded better.